This week on Inside Olympia, our exit interview with Roger Rogoff, the first director of Washington's Office of Independent Investigations. Why did he leave now, and what challenges face his successor? Plus, we'll talk with the lawmaker at the forefront of Washington's efforts to hold police more accountable to the public.
From the TVW studio, it's Inside Olympia with host Austin Jenkins.
Welcome to Inside Olympia. Our focus this week is police accountability, and specifically Washington's Office of Independent Investigations, which is responsible for investigating police deadly force cases. In our second half, we'll talk with the lawmaker credited as the architect of the Office of Independent Investigations and get her views on the work of the office to date and proposals to create a separate Office of Independent Prosecution to weigh charges in these cases. But first, our exit interview with the Office of Independent Investigation's first director, who recently stepped down from that role. What did he accomplish during his tenure, and what's left to be done? Joining me now is former King County Superior Court judge and the recently departed director of the Office of Independent Investigations, Roger Rogoff. Good to see you. Thanks for coming back to do this.
Good to see you as well.
We've talked numerous times over the course of your tenure in this role as you stood up this office from scratch, from nothing. Now you're leaving, or have left, handing this off to an interim director pending the appointment of a permanent successor. First question out of the gate is, why did you decide to leave now? Was it your decision, the governor's decision, a combination of the two? But what was the reason that this was the moment in time to step away?
I think the timing made sense. We have a new governor. I had served my term of 3 years, which, and then had extended it a little bit beyond then. We've stood the office up. We've proven that this idea that the legislature had to independently investigate use of deadly force cases by police was something that could happen, that can be done well, can be done fairly and neutrally. And we have become operational. So I thought it was a nice time, I think it is a nice time to hand this off to the group that can then move this statewide and really work within state government to expand the agency and make sure that it is doing all the work that it's mandated to do.
What would you say about the 4 years you spent in this role? This office was put into statute in 2021. I think the authority began in 22. It's been a slow climb into sort of fruition, and there are 6 regions around the state that need to have investigators to investigate these cases. Only one of them is operational at this point. The second one will come online in May. But now that you're the former director, was this rewarding, frustrating, exhausting? How would you describe the 4 years?
Yes, all of those things. But I would say more than anything, it was gratifying. The opportunity for the first time in my life to put together a team, a big, large team that has one particular mission was unbelievably fun to do. I just got to meet and hire and then work with an incredible group of people who wanted to do something that had never been done before. And they all had different skills, different perspectives, different experiences, and they all came together to push in one direction in order to get this thing off the ground. They did it. They've done it really well. They've done it really credibly. Nobody who has read the final case reports that we've put out has said anything but positive things about it. They are thoughtful and comprehensive and neutral and designed to give the public an idea of what happened in these cases.
The idea that one of the 6 regions is up and running, 2 of the 6 as of this spring will be, but really no timeline for the remainder, and the need to hire a bunch more staff to get to the level where that will be possible. And at the same time, we're in a state tight budget times. Funding has been cut for this agency. What is your message to legislators and budget writers about what is going to be necessary to see this thing through?
Well, first I'd want to thank the legislators who have worked with us and who have taken the time to understand what we do. I think it was really hard at the beginning because there were some legislators who had a real deep understanding of what we were doing, and then you had legislators who had an idea of it but really hadn't dug deep into what it was about. But we went out and we talked to legislators throughout the last 4 years, and I would say that the level of understanding of OII has increased exponentially. They have been thoughtful and they have been interested in what we do. And no matter what their political underpinnings might be, they have come to us with good intent, and I think we have made progress with helping them understand what we intend to do. That we are not a group of people whose job it is to get the police, and we are not a group of people who are out there to make sure that police don't get prosecuted or held accountable. We are a group that is designed to find the facts and to do it in a way that is understandable to the public and gives everyone a set of shared facts from which they can make whatever political, policy, or other arguments they want to make. But at least we'll be talking about a set of facts that we can all agree on.
In that sense, what you're saying is that the idea of this first-in-the-nation agency has been socialized to some extent. There's maybe more comfort level with it. But then there's the operational side, which is it's moved so slowly, at least based on what original expectations were. And sitting here today, and I'll ask you the question, can we say at this point, based on the current trajectory and given the budget realities, how long it will take to get this agency fully stood up? You know, the numbers I'm looking at are you're trying to go from 30 or so investigators today to more than 100 to really be able to fully staff 6 regions. And I'm wondering, you know, are we 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 years out before this thing will be really cruising down the road?
So the model that this was based on was a Canadian model that exists in British Columbia and a couple of other provinces. Those agencies took upwards of 10 years to really be fully functional. And I would say that doing it in Canada is a lot easier than doing it in the United States. In those provinces, you have one prosecutor. You have very few police agencies. In the state of Washington, you have 293 police agencies. You have 39 prosecutors. So when people say it's gone slower than expected, I don't agree. The moment I stepped foot into this role from day one, I told people anytime I had an opportunity, this is not happening in 2022, and this is not happening in the next couple years. This is going to take time. We are going to make sure we're doing it right before we're doing it. And so we have been consistent in our message and in what we've said. I can't control what other people want and hope for. We, of course, would love for this to have started, you know, the moment that I stepped on campus, but that simply wasn't a reality.
So Region 1 has been up for, I guess, a little over a year. Region 2 will come online in May. Olympic region in Southwest Washington is going. The Pierce County is next in May. What is your, and it's not your job anymore to make this happen, but what is your thinking about when 3, 4, 5, and 6 might be able to come online?
First of all, the numbers won't be in order, most likely.
Yeah. Right, because in fact, you are doing 1 and 2, but then
Just sort of happen that
and
way.
you've promised the next one will be 5, which is Central Washington.
Right.
But you didn't put a timeline in that.
We didn't, because that will depend on resources. We have, I think, 13 investigators out on the east side, split between Region 5 and Region 6, which is Spokane. Region 5 is the middle of the state. So they need more investigators in order to do that work. And so I can't put a timeline on it because it's the resources that are going to drive that, and I don't know when they will get the resources. I can say that based on the work, first of all, Region 1 and 2 is a third of the state, if you're counting by counties. So it's a large swath of Washington that we're covering now, and it's a big job covering that ground. We also want to make sure that the east side of the state is covered, and that's why Region 5 and hopefully Region 6 are coming online as soon as we can get them.
Then let me loop back to that question about lawmakers. You praised them on the one hand for understanding the mission here, but given that the opportunity to continue expanding and rolling this out and not sort of stalling out will require more investigators, more money. Your budget's actually been cut. At one point, it looked like maybe OII would even face layoffs, which would be heading in the opposite direction of where you need to go. What is again, now that you're the emeritus executive director, what do you think legislators need to know, what does the governor's office need to know about what it's going to take to get there?
I think that they know. We have been real clear with everyone what kind of resources, what kind of human resources it will take to be doing this statewide competently. And we've told them it's going to take about 100 investigators to make it work. The idea at the very beginning of the creation of this agency that it would take 5 to 6 investigators per region to cover the state was just not a reasonable idea of how this could work. There simply need to be more, not only because you need more to do the work, but because even if it only took 5 to 6 investigators to do it, you would need 10 to 12 in order to get 5 to 6 investigators to the scene. People are on vacation. People get sick. People can't be on call 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So I think there was just some misunderstanding at the very early stages of how much it was going to take to do the work. And we're going to have to close that gap. And I think that given the type of work we've done and the way that we've done it, it will make it more likely that legislators of all kinds and all types and all backgrounds will be more likely to support that because we are doing it well.
So far, this office has released 3 critical incident reports from Vancouver PD, Centralia, and Paulsbo. What lessons would you say have been learned so far for the agency? And then I'll ask you more broadly about law enforcement, but what did you guys learn? I know when we last had you on, we talked quite a bit about Vancouver and some of the early lessons, but now that there's a couple of more investigations under the belts of these investigators, what would you say?
Finding ways to get to these scenes as fast as possible is really important for this agency because we're covering such a large geographic area. So working with Washington State Patrol and law enforcement agencies across the state to allow us to use lights and sirens in a limited fashion to get us to places a little bit faster, making sure that from internally that our folks are prepared with everything they need as soon as they get to the scene, that we skip some of the steps that law enforcement agencies engage in terms of full in-person briefings at a scene. We're going to do a lot more communication as we're moving to the scene so that we can be faster once we get there, and then prioritizing what we do at the scene, getting those officers who have been in an incident processed as soon as possible because that's really the place where speed is the most important. A scene is closed off and it's protected and it's secure. We have some time there unless there's weather issues where the evidence isn't going anywhere. No one is leaving, no one is fleeing. And so we have a little bit more time at the scene. But getting to the officers, getting them processed and getting them out the door is really important. And we have focused on that in terms of our priorities once we get to the scene.
What would you say success has meant? And going forward, as you think about this agency and these investigators, keeping success in mind, sort of what are the non-negotiables when it comes to operating standards or the way that this work is done?
So I think the non-negotiables are continuing to engage in best practices in terms of the actual investigating, so that if one of these cases is ever in court or when one of these cases is in court, this investigation abides by best practices, will be accepted by a judge, will be accepted by a jury, will be able to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. That part is really important. I think success also is shown in the existence of the family liaison program and the tribal liaison program of this office. I'm incredibly proud that we made it a priority to make those two teams really important parts of what we do. The fact that an impacted family, and those families have done nothing wrong, they've just lost a loved one, have a person who is not in the same uniform as the person who just shot or killed or hurt their loved one, who is not in a uniform at all, and has access to resources, has an ability to provide communication about the investigation, is completely different than anything that had existed before. It's really important, and it is incredibly helpful in helping with these really emotional, really traumatic incidents.
I know I've asked you before about the existing regional task forces or entities that currently investigate in the other regions. What is your latest thinking about their need and role going forward as the OII's teams move into regions?
I think that they have a place. They will continue to assist in different ways. First of all, we're only doing fatality, so any non-fatal use of deadly force case is going to be investigated by an IIT. Oftentimes, in situations where an IIT can get to a scene more quickly than we can, especially when there's bad weather that's washing away evidence, or there are witnesses who are going to leave, if an IIT can get there, begin the investigation in terms of just securing what we have, it's incredibly important. But I think that the fact that these agencies won't need IITs in the same way they used to, it's going to save them money. It's going to save the state money eventually. It's going to save counties and municipalities money. And they can direct those resources to other places where I know that we've heard law enforcement agencies talking a lot about needing more resources, needing more law enforcement officers. This allows them to redirect those resources.
Does that, though, also represent a shift in maybe what the original thinking was about IITs and their purpose going forward? And does it reflect the need to sort of, for the Office of Independent Investigation to be building relationships with those IITs so that when there is an incident, there's that conversation happening? Who needs, do we need you guys to go and show up because the evidence is washing away? That there's some trust there so that you can work together?
So you asked earlier about some of the accomplishments, and I think that is one of them. We have really worked hard to build credibility with those agencies so that when we do need to talk to them about what is happening at a scene, or we need to figure out who's going to be where at what time, those conversations can be had with a little bit of trust. But there's tension there because I think it also is incredibly important for this agency to maintain its independence. And so you're building those relationships while at the same time trying to maintain some distance so that you can do your work in a neutral way without falling into the same patterns that got us here into the first place.
When we last spoke, there was I mentioned that the statute says that the agency is supposed to finish its investigations within 120 days, and you mentioned that there was some talk of maybe trying to move that out, perhaps even as far as 6 months. As you were leaving, what was the status of that conversation?
So I thought about this a lot and went back and looked at some of the state auditor reports on some of the IIT investigations that have occurred over the last however many years. Very rarely do they get those reports. Do they get from going to a scene to some sort of public report in less than a year? Very rarely. And the reason that happens is because when a regular police agency sends its case to the prosecutor's office, they don't write the kind of report that we write. They send a bunch of police reports and other material to the prosecutor, and then the prosecutor grabs onto it, holds onto it for another however long to review the case, and then sends something out. And that's the first time the public sees it. The problem with that is twofold. First of all, it takes a long time. And second of all, when that prosecutor sends something out, it is by design an advocacy piece rather than a neutral piece of writing to tell the public what happened. It's designed to say either I'm filing this case and here's why, or I'm not filing this case and here's why. That's advocacy. And our reports, first of all, happen as soon as we send the case to the prosecutor. So that cuts off probably 5-6 months of time. And second of all, it's not an advocacy piece. It is, here are the facts, and here's how we figured out what the facts are. It is such a better deal now, even if we don't get any faster. But first of all, we will get faster as time goes on. We'll just get better at writing these. And second of all, I think the 4 months is really aggressive, and 6 months probably makes more sense.
But is there at this point, it would, to go out to 6 months, I mean, you can take that time and if you need it, but do you think the statute should be changed to just make that the default?
I think it would be helpful if it was, but I don't think it needs to. It's not a deadline. It's a marker by which we have to communicate with our advisory board. We have to say, hey, this is taking longer than 4 months. Here's why.
Okay. What is, we're going to be talking with the legislators about this kind of perennial proposal to create an Office of Independent Investigation. I actually had forgotten. Prosecution, sorry, thank you. I had forgotten that originally as written, I guess that the thinking was they would put that under the OII or make it part of the OII, but now the way it's been amended, it would be part of the governor's office. But what is, as a former state and federal prosecutor and judge, and now as the recently departed executive director of this office, is that a missing kind of linchpin to make this work?
I think it'd be important, and I think it would be helpful. I mean, we just watched in Minnesota an incident occur, and very little independence and very little transparency in the investigation and potential review by a prosecutor. In fact, we don't know who's reviewing it, we don't really know who's investigating it, and we don't know who's going to make the decision. The importance of having an entity that is independent, or as independent as possible, of all of the players that have an interest in the outcome, I think we've proven is so important in establishing credibility. And I am a big proponent of more independence in every part of the criminal legal system. As a former judge, we conflict out of cases all the time, and there's no negative to it. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It just means, hey, if I sit here and hear this case, the people who are affected by it aren't going to feel like they were treated fairly. And it's that appearance of fairness, that appearance of a lack of conflict, that is incredibly important, especially in these types of cases. So yeah, I think it'd be great.
One of the criticisms has been that it would be an unconstitutional delegation of authority and that these charging decisions belong with the county prosecutors. And again, you worked for one. You were a senior assistant county prosecutor. What's your thinking on that one?
If you look at what was going on when the state constitution was written, and for the, 150 years after that, up until about a decade ago, I don't think that there was a lot of prosecutors spending a lot of time reviewing and making decisions on use of deadly force cases by police. The idea that we're taking this power away from prosecutors who weren't using it for a really long time doesn't make a lot of sense. And really, we're supposed to go back to what they were doing at the time that the Constitution was written, at the time they put that clause into place that explained what a prosecutor does. And they certainly weren't investigating these cases. In fact, the inquest process was the process for doing that. And that process doesn't exist anymore. So I don't see that constitutional argument winning the day in the end, but our Supreme Court will tell us.
I know that it's hard to draw conclusions from only 3 investigations on the part of your team, but are there any themes that are emerging about root causes or lessons that might emerge about how we could prevent these deadly force incidents? Do police officers need better training or a different kind of training? Is there just anything that you've, in reading these and reviewing these, you've gleaned yet?
Yeah, I don't think it'd be fair for me to say anything like that after 3 cases. I wouldn't want to. I could be completely wrong. And so,
Would that ultimately be a purpose here or not?
yes, I think so.
When there's more data?
Yep.
Let's just, as we wind down here, talk about what your what advice you would give to your successor, the challenges that they're facing, what is going to be needed in the next leader for this office.
So first of all, the interim director, Jane Nesbitt, I think is an incredibly competent, brilliant leader.
She was your chief of staff.
She was, and her background really is in state government and organization building, which at this point, after having established some credibility that we can do these investigations well, is really what's going to be important in the next few years as we move statewide. So I think her being there is really a great happenstance and is really a nice transition. If I had to give advice, it is to stay the course in terms of being neutral and careful in terms of what we do, in terms of how we write and how we appear in public, to continue communicating with all of the folks who are impacted by these cases, by the reform folks who want more, law enforcement who want a little bit less, and everyone in between. And keep in mind that it is the public in the end who are the consumers of these reports and the consumers of this work. And they are the ones that we need to focus on.
Your next chapter is to go back into the practice of law, but as you start to reflect on this time in this role, what are you most proud of?
So I am most proud of the people that we put together, the group that we created, and this ability to take folks who, former law enforcement, people who have never particularly spent a lot of time with law enforcement, and everyone in between, and put them in a room and hashed out policies and procedures and an infrastructure that really works has been incredibly gratifying. It was hard. It wasn't always pleasant, but this group really worked hard to make this thing successful. And they've done it, and all they need now is a little help going statewide, and this is going to be the model that every other state in the country is going to want to follow.
So even though it's taken a long time, and even though there's had to be quite a recalibration about kind of expectations, this was not a mistake.
This is the opposite of a mistake. I think this was an idea that people weren't 100% sure of at the time that they passed it. And as it turns out, they were more right than they probably knew they were, that this is what needed to happen in the state of Washington. And I believe that if they make it go statewide and they really allow it to work, it will make all the difference in the world.
Okay. I appreciate you coming back in, especially after having left this position. You didn't need to do that, so thank you, Roger Rogoff. I've enjoyed our conversations over the last few years.
Of course, so have I.
Good luck in your next endeavor.
Thank you.
And when we return, we talk with a legislator who's been on the front lines of police accountability efforts. Back after this.
Stolen vehicles are a problem. We need a solution. Pursuits are not the solution to that.
Just hit another vehicle.
With the current pursuit law, you could literally have someone steal a vehicle and drive through a school zone actively at 100 miles an hour back and forth, and no one will be able to do anything about that.
Passing by school.
Welcome back to Inside Olympia. Our focus this week is police accountability and Washington's Office of Independent Investigations. Joining me now is Democratic State Representative Deborah Entenman, who was the prime sponsor of the 2021 legislation that established Washington's Office of Independent Investigations, creating a statewide system for independent reviews of police use of deadly force incidents. She's also the sponsor of a bill that was just signed to expand the jurisdiction of that office and make some other changes. So we're going to get right to that. But welcome back to the program. Nice to see you.
Thank you for having me.
I want to begin just with, because we've had conversations over the last several years with Roger Rogoff, the now recently departed executive director or director of this agency, explaining why it's taking a while to stand up this office, longer than was expected. So before we talk about your new legislation and some of the details of this office and how it's operating, I'm just interested to get your sort of gut check or pulse on whether you're satisfied, dissatisfied, understanding or not understanding the pace that this has taken?
I do understand the pace that this has taken. I think as a person who may be outside of the legislature, we think about implementation days and when something is supposed to start. We created a new agency. Really doing the first work that I know of in the United States when we are looking to investigate police officers in the use of deadly force. The original piece of legislation and the work that I knew about had come from Canada, and so we were modeling our bill where we could on that piece of legislation. So we were really creating something new. We were doing something new. It takes a little bit of time. I understand, being a legislator and working 12 years at the federal level, that you can have an idea, that you can pass a bill. Implementation takes a while. And I think in any good legislation, there are times when you will need to amend and make changes. So I am not disappointed in the legislation as it stands. Of course, the original bill had the Office of Independent Investigations and Prosecutions. I'm still hopeful that we will get an Office of Independent Prosecution. I believe that creating this Office of Independent Investigation will help us to do that, because it will help to inform us what we really need to be successful in those independent prosecutions. So I am not unhappy. Of course, time is time. When you start from nothing and you have something, it's better than the nothing that you started with.
Well, one of the things that strikes me is that we're 4 years in from when the legislation was introduced. OII is only operating in one region, soon to be 2 regions. Roger Rogoff said to be fully operational, this agency will probably need more than 100 employees. So there's 2 issues there: the pace at which they're bringing these regions online, and there's no date promised for those other regions. Mm-hmm. So let's start with that. Can you live with 2 regions as of this year and not knowing when the other ones will be ready and whether there will be staffing sufficient to bring them online?
So staffing is about resources. Resources really is about money. I think that if we have proven ourselves to do a good job, we will expand the regions over time. I think if we have a positive working relationship with community and with law enforcement, we will expand the regional operation in time. I hope to live to see that, but I believe that it will happen as long as we have the will.
Let me sort of tease this out a little bit, though. Mm-hmm. Am I to hear you say, because obviously this requires the legislature to appropriate more funds so that they can continue to expand, mm-hmm. that, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but let me just ask if I'm hearing you correctly, that you are viewing Regions 1 and Regions 2 as sort of a test bed to see how this goes, to see if it does what it was supposed to, which is to create this independent investigation model, build back some trust in especially affected communities, and then the legislature will evaluate and decide whether it makes sense to continue funding Regions 3, 4, 5, and I think it's 6?
I would say that it, of course, is my hope that I know that there is a plan in my mind for all of those regions to be built out. I don't think of 1 and 2 as a test ground as much as I think of them as the first of many. We, of course, will learn things from 1 and 2 that I hope we can incorporate in other regions in the future. But I don't want to give the impression that in our original bill, we did not want all of these regions to be stood up. We understood that it was going to cost money. We also know that with our economic forecast in our state, we can have wishes and dreams, but we also have to fund them. I I'm not a spokesperson for the Coalition for Police Accountability, but I can say I have worked with members of that group enough to know what we want is fair and equitable treatment no matter what part of the state we live in. When it comes to interacting with law enforcement, we want fair, transparent, and equitable investigations. And when necessary, we want police to be prosecuted. Now, for example, many of us have been looking at what is happening in Clark County. It is my understanding that the sheriff has made a statement. I haven't heard it, so I want to clarify that he hasn't said it to me, but he is opposed to bringing charges against police officers. So, but I want our statewide law enforcement and our statewide Office of Independent Investigations to work in every region of the state. So I'm concerned about Clark County and how we will continue to work with them, and people who live in those communities will feel like, will understand and will know that when they interact with police and police use deadly force, there will be justice in Clark County. That is a concern.
Of course, the charging decision would come from the county prosecutor. I know that those who support the idea of an office of independent prosecution at a statewide level have some concerns about whether county prosecutors are too close to their local law enforcement. But let's go back to the investigations to date.
Okay.
What is your preliminary or early sense of how this is working, especially through the lens of, are these independent? Can they be trusted? Are we seeing more daylight on these deadly force incidents? Do you have an early review? I know there's only been a couple of final reports, but what do you think so far? Again, as the legislator who created this
I know this
office.
is hard. Roger Goodman calls me the godmother of the Office of Independent
And
Investigation.
he, of course, is the chair of the Public Safety Committee.
And, I really do feel like this is something that I birthed, that this is my child. I want to see it through. Whether I'm a member of the legislature or just a citizen in Washington State, this bill and a bill around food for college students will be the two bills that will always stand out for me as things that I did in the legislature that I am most proud of. Saying that, I know that I have to be patient. And just like with a child, you can have your idea about what they will do as they move forward in their future, whether they go to college or go to trade school or decide that they want to be a roadie. That happened, but now that person is a computer science engineer. So he got off track a little, or on track a little, whatever you want to say, but it came out okay. So I know what I want to happen. I have to work within the process and the parameters of the legislature and funding and community and changes to make sure that it happens. It might not be the road and path that I wanted to take, but I'm really hopeful that the final outcome will be what I want, what members of the Coalition for Police Accountability want, and even things that law enforcement can live with. It's really hard. This is not an easy piece of legislation, and so it's not a quick and easy path.
Well, and that's what Roger Rogoff would say too, which is this has required a culture change. It's required introducing this agency to police agencies across the state, trying to get their trust, introducing this agency to members of the community, trying to build trust there. But it is up and running in one region, and he will say, look, for the first time ever, we're seeing publicly released reports that summarize what happened, that detail the sequence of events. So to that end, do you feel like, even though it's only in one region today, that it's working as you envisioned?
I think it's working. I think it's working. I think it's going to take time for it to work throughout the state. But I am not unhappy with the outcomes we have seen so far.
What is the commitment? And I know you're just one vote, one legislator, but what commitment do you think this legislature has to fully fund and grow this agency, especially in tough budget times, given that some of the cuts that were being contemplated, at least last year, Roger was in a situation where he might have had to lay people off. That did not happen. But as long as they're not getting significant additional funds, it's going to be very hard to scale this.
It is going to be difficult to scale.
So what is the commitment from your perspective of this legislature to keep this going and growing?
I'm not sure I can speak for the whole legislature. What I can say is this. I know that when I look at the chair of public safety in the House, that Roger Goodman and I have worked well together to keep this moving, even though I am not a member of the Public Safety Committee. I'm on Civil Rights and the Judiciary. I believe that discussions in our caucus that we have had about police accountability and public safety are going to be ongoing, whether I am a member of the Democratic caucus or not. I believe that that is just a fundamental, foundational part of who we are as Democrats. I also believe that Republicans also believe that believe in public safety. I don't think we're as far apart as some people want to believe that we are. There are just different paths. I do believe that with the responsibility of being a law enforcement officer, a trained professional law enforcement officer, there are things that they will learn to do differently. There will be a culture shift. I don't believe that, as some people are saying, people don't want to be in law enforcement. Our classes are full. There are waiting lists. It's not like the Regional Justice Training Center doesn't have a waiting list. So I believe that we can do this work. I believe that it will take time. I'm hoping to see it in my lifetime.
Let's talk about this bill that passed this year that was just signed. It's what brought you down to Olympia, to expand and clarify some things with respect to the Office of Independent Investigations. One of the things this bill does is it expands jurisdiction over use of force deaths to broaden authority to investigate not only deadly force incidents, but any use of force that may have caused or contributed to a death, including retroactive review of prior cases, regardless of when they occurred. Why did you feel this was necessary, especially when you think about the underlying jurisdiction of this office in the original legislation?
Well, this bill was brought to me from the Office of Independent Investigation. Roger and his team, I know there are wonderful people doing the work now, based on information that they had from their trained investigators saying that they needed a little bit more. And so Roger actually asked me to move this piece of legislation.
So this was agency request in
This
that
is
sense.
agency request legislation, that's correct. And I was happy to do so. It was not against anything that we had thought about in the original piece of legislation. I think it strengthened in some ways the original piece of legislation. I believe we got the police and sheriffs walk-ops to neutral, which is good for us. I don't know.
And that I think it's would it be WASPIC or
WASPIC,
Yeah,
sorry.
okay.
WASPIC, sorry about that.
Both organizations exist, but
Right,
if it's-
WASPIC,
yeah,
excuse
okay.
me. We got them to neutral, which is a good thing. I know that Representative Burnett, who is also on Civil Rights and the Judiciary, signed on as a co-sponsor to the bill. He is a former law enforcement officer from Eastern Washington, and he had talked to many of his colleagues about the piece of legislation, so we had some support there. I think we're doing better than I had hoped. We had no call to defund the agency, which, you know, people can always ask. So I think we're moving. It is slow. I'm not going to say that I am not. The word is not disappointed. I understand that it takes time to do good work. I'd rather for it to be done well than to be done quickly.
I should note that this bill also has a retroactive clause that allows investigations of prior evidence where new evidence emerges. think that was already in the underlying bill.
That
but
was in the
there's- but
underlying
there's
bill.
some kind of clarity or clarification there that exists.
Right.
A lower threshold for notification. Law enforcement agencies must now notify OII not only in deadly force cases, but whenever there's good reason, again, to believe that use of force might have contributed to a death. There's some changes around control of the scenes, data access, public disclosure. One might look at this, and it's interesting knowing that it's agency request legislation, and say it actually is kind of expanding the footprint or giving them more responsibility when we're already talking about the fact they don't have the resources to do the basics here. So what's the thinking there? Why give more authority to an agency that's already struggling to do the sort of fundamental first step?
I would not use the word struggle.
Okay.
I would use the word we are growing and we are learning, and from our successes and from our challenges, we learn new things. As we learn new things, we learned that we needed additional resources. They requested additional resources. The legislature passed that and the governor signed the bill. So they obviously proved that there were things that they needed within the parameters of what we had looked at in the past, and they wanted to expand those parameters so they could do a good job. And I believe in the agency. I don't think I'm sad to see Roger go because I think he was a great leader, but I truly believe that the agency is doing good work. So I'm hopeful.
I was going to ask you about Roger's tenure. What more could you say about his role as the first director of this agency and getting it stood up and getting it to this point?
I think that based on the work that I saw him do and the conversations that he had and the challenges that he met head on, he did an excellent job. I was surprised to learn, I read it in the paper, that he was no longer going to be in leadership. Not that anyone needed to inform me of that, but it was a surprise to me. I truly believe that once you are in this work, whether he is officially in this work or not, I believe he will be a resource for the folks in the agency, for the new director, and just like me, whether doing something different or retired from the legislature, this will always be a part of the work that we will want to do.
His chief of staff is now the interim director. This office is under the auspices of the governor's office. What are you looking for in the next permanent director? What do you think the agency needs next?
So we're set up now. So I really think that we need someone who can come in, have the support of staff, because I don't think we can do this work if people don't have a sense that their leader will support them and is competent to do the work. And I think that they will have to be a bit of a politician in the fact that they will need to be able to engage with people who are outside of the agency, like community members, like folks in the Coalition for Police Accountability, and work with law enforcement and listen, but still be a leader. So you have to listen to what people want, and you have to do the politics of agency leadership.
It's a tall order.
It's going to be a challenge.
How well do you think the Office of Independent Investigations Oversight Board is operating, this community oversight board?
Well, I've heard from a few members. I've received letters when people are unhappy. Mm-hmm. So I think that they are using their voice. They are willing and able to stand up to the director, and I think that they're good for. I think they were good for Roger. I think they'll be good for the interim director and whoever the next director will be. I think that having a strong board with a strong voice is important for leadership.
You mentioned this idea of the independent prosecutor, that there was a bill again this year. I don't believe it was your bill. But where do those conversations stand? It sounds like this idea is not going away.
No.
The
idea is not going away. I know that Representative Stonier had moved the last iteration of the bill. I have to honestly say that I was a little bit too close, and I talked to the folks in the Coalition for Police Accountability, and I said I thought that they would get further with someone else because I was too close to the bill. I could not figure out a way to have what they wanted, which was a change in the state constitution that took the prosecutor out. The way they really wanted an independent prosecutor. The bill that I had, the piece of legislation that I had, we would still have to work with the county prosecutor, and then that person would refer out, right? That's
It'd be like a designation,
Right.
because the county prosecutor does have that authority
Right.
or that role.
right. And so I could not work a policy angle that would exclude the county prosecutor. And so that's where my roadblock came for the
And
bill.
just to be clear, why was that?
Because we needed a change in the actual
And
constitution.
which you didn't think was not realistic.
To change the Washington State Constitution is not an easy thing to do.
Right. Two-thirds vote and a vote of the people.
Exactly.
How do you respond to people who say that this is still a decision that should be left up to local prosecutors, and that the idea that there would be a statewide prosecutor would be essentially an unconstitutional power grab? That's the criticism you often hear of this idea.
What I would say is that we have had our first conviction of an officer for homicide in Auburn, a district that I represent. Mr. Saray lost his life at the hands of a police officer, and it was considered to be homicide. Those charges were brought, a case was brought, and that police officer, if I'm not mistaken, is now serving time or will shortly be serving time. I believe that there is an appeal, but I'm not sure where that stands at this particular time. That was a difficult thing to do. I believe that it was the right thing to do. I can't believe that he is the only police officer in the history of Washington State that has committed homicide. I believe that we really need to work hard to ensure that there is accountability for police so that there is trust of police.
Of course, that was prosecuted at the county level, so some might say, well, that's proof that the system does work.
I think that there was a lot of pressure when we were doing this work that may have been an influence, and I think that was good pressure.
We have about a minute left. I'm looking at a list of police reforms that have been passed since 2018, and it's a long list. And the OII is part of that. In the big picture here, how do you feel these changes are working? The new deadly force standard, the de-escalation requirements, the training requirements, the work kind of in concert with each other. What would you say about where we are versus where we were, say, in 2018, 2019, 2020?
I think we are in a better place than we were. I believe that we have more to do. I believe that we have more people in our community understanding what public safety is, and it is more than just law enforcement. I believe that law enforcement is now beginning to understand that just because we don't agree with them always doesn't mean that we are always against them. I believe there are more conversations that are happening, and I believe everyone should be able to stand up to review. So I believe good things are happening.
Okay. State Representative Deborah Entenman, thank you for coming in. Appreciate the conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see you again, and thank you for watching Inside Olympia. We will see you again next week.